Okay, so good evening. My name is Nancy Kraushar, and I'm the Public Works Director and City Engineer in Oregon City. And looks like there are a few more people walking in, which is great. We are here tonight to provide information about our Water Master Plan Update project. It is our last Water Master Plan was adopted in 2004, and much of the work that was recommended in that plan has been completed, and it was time to update our master plan so that we can understand our needs for the future of our water system in Oregon City for the next 20 years or so. And also we had, many of you may know, we have 3 urban growth boundary expansion areas in Oregon City, and we wanted to make sure those were addressed in our water master plan. Those all came in since 2004. And we have presented this information to the Planning Commission. We wanted to make sure we had a public meeting to present the information, so anybody attending would be able to learn about the Water Master Plan update. We also will be putting this on our website. It'll go through Willamette Falls Television, and we'll have it on our website, so for those that weren't able to come tonight, they will have an opportunity to see it. We are going to be giving the presentation to the Citizen Involvement Council in December, the first Monday in December. And then we go to the City Commission for a work session, and we've invited the Planning Commission to attend that. They don't need to, but we thought it might be beneficial to have both commissions there if they so desire. We'll be presenting it to the City Commission at their work session in December, which is the second Tuesday. And then after that, in January, we'll be going back to the City Commission for the Planning Commission. Well, the Planning Commission is going to move it forward to the City Commission, and in January we'll be having public hearings at the City Commission for the adoption of the master plan into our comprehensive plan. West Yost is the consultant. They did the Water Master Plan 8 years ago, and they've also completed our update. Walt Meyer, who has been in water engineering for a long time, we're privileged to have him be our consultant on this project, and he will go ahead and give the presentation, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions and show and tell what happens to a water line when it's been in the ground for 10, 20, 40 years. Some of those are pretty old. And we'll be talking about what we did with the master plan, and we'll be talking about how we fund our water system. And so I'll just have you take it away, Walt.
Thank you, Nancy. Good evening. My name is Walt Meyer with West Yost, and I'm going to give you an overview of the Water Distribution System Master Plan. And let me emphasize that I will be talking about the water distribution system. The City of Oregon City gets its water from the South Fork Water Board, which also provides water to West Lynn, and that's sort of a separate piece, although obviously all the water is wielded through your water distribution system. I'm going to talk about your service area. I'm going to give you a synopsis of the amount of water demand that you experience and the variability of the water demand. Give you a little overview of the existing water distribution system and some of the future expansion that is going to be required to serve into the build-out of your urban growth boundary, recommended improvements, and then a lot of it on financing and rates. And of course, questions. Service area. You have at this time about 32,000 people that you serve through your water distribution system, which is almost 10,000 customers. And we're planning both for those and for development in the urban growth boundary based upon the land use that's planned for that urban growth boundary, which is shown here. The purple line on the outside here is your urban growth boundary. And the way the water distribution system works is we're essentially laying out like a spider or a network of the larger pipes that allow you to serve the area. And because it's so expensive to put these pipes in the ground, these are sized to serve the entire area. And then as development comes, the developers actually put in the smaller pipes as part of their development. But we want to make sure that your pumping, your storage, and your major pipelines have adequate capacity to serve the entire surface area. Yes, sir.
When you talk about the approximate 10,000 customers, is that residential and industrial?
That's both, yes. Yes. Now, a little quick overview of the existing water demand. Right now, you have an average annual demand of just a little bit over 4 million gallons per day. You have a maximum month of 7 million gallons a day, a max day of approaching 10 million gallons a day, and a peak hour of up over 20. And that reflects the patterns of water use. As you know, in the summertime when you're irrigating, you're using more water. And so that represents a max month would be in the summertime when there's a lot of water being used for irrigation. A max day is that extreme hot day where people are really pouring the water to their lawns and to their gardens. And then, of course, the peak hour, that's a large number, but remember that's being served primarily from storage. So what happens during that peak hour, your output from the water treatment plant and your pump stations stays constant, and what happens then is you drawing down the reservoirs during that. And we've calculated that. It's not really something that your operations group can measure, but we can evaluate it by looking at how the reservoirs are coming down and how much you're producing and doing the calculations, and that's how we calculated the peak hour.
Yeah, I might add, does everyone in the room know where our water reservoirs are in Oregon City? Okay, we have
I think
one.
I have a map too.
Oh,
I can
good.
bring
okay.
up too.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to make
Okay.
sure.
But yeah, I'll come to that. Okay. And just so that you know kind of what the makeup is of your user base, of that over 4 million, about 2.2 comes from single-family dwelling. The commercial industrial is a 0.66. Multifamily residential is 0.55, and institutional, which would be schools and governmental buildings and so forth, is 0.3 MGD. So you can see, if you add the 0.55 to the 2.2, a good majority of your demand is from residential use. Now I'm going to talk about your system a little bit. You have a great water supply. I mean, the Clackamas River is superb water. It's one of the few glacier-fed streams in the country that supplies a municipal water system. So you really do have the benefit of an extraordinarily excellent water system. You have storage, metering, pumping station, and distribution. And let me talk about that. First of all, you have about 18 million gallons of treated water storage in your system, made up of 5 reservoirs, and it's plenty for what you need right now. You will only need in the future more storage as you build out into the urban growth boundary. Your largest storage is, of course, Division Street, which is, Nancy, you can help me there. You can explain it better than I can.
Mountain View.
I mean Mountain View.
Right. We have a 10.5 million gallon tank at Mountain View behind the grocery outlet.
And that's right there.
And then we have a smaller tank, about a 2 million gallon tank across the street from that, on the north side of Mountain View. Then we have a 2 million gallon tank out on Boynton Street, out in the South End area. And we also have a 2 million gallon tank up in Park Place, Barlow Crest Reservoir. Oh, Henry C., right?
Yeah.
We also have a 2 million gallon tank out
Henry C.
on Henry C. Road, which is south of Oregon City. But we need to have it that far out to make sure we have enough height to provide the pressure to get back into our Glen Oak Road area, Fairway Downs areas.
The Division Street, or the main 10 million gallon tank, has a lot of loss in it. Is there any way that I know that in talking to some of the water people in the past, after the earthquake improvements were made around it, still the amount of seepage from it is still significant. I've had it related to me, and I can't remember the exact number, but the way I remember it being like we're buying a lot of water from South Fork and then having a lot of the water seep into the ground as a direct result of the way the bottom of the tank is. Can that be
Oh, that's right.
talked to about?
Would you repeat that, please, Paul?
The recording isn't picking it up. in this.
Okay, the division or the main water storage tank of 10 million gallons was upgraded with a major upgrade to it, but it still didn't stop the seepage from inside the tank. And it's I was once told that it was 5 to 7% of the water that goes into the tank seeps out of the tank into the ground. And I don't know what the exact number is, but I understand that it's quite significant. And if we're buying that water from South Fork, I just wanted to understand what we can do. Is there anything we can do? Are those accurate numbers?
I don't know if those are accurate numbers, number one. we do try to keep those cracks sealed as much as we can, and we'd have to do a more collect some more data to really evaluate how much water is really being leaking out of the tank. It's very old concrete at the bottom.
We did not, as part of this, do an evaluation of the leakage of that tank, and I haven't seen numbers as to what the leakage is. Have you, Eli, are you aware of any?
Well, there, after the improvements were done with the seismic and all that, after the improvements that were done at the 10 and a half, when was that?
It was about 5 years ago.
5 years ago. They did do a lot of sealing of the on the floor, the seal cracks that they did have. And there is an improvement. There isn't as many leaks, but next year we're having the divers come back, and they're going to check some of these cracks. And while they do inspect them, they'll seal them at the same time. There's been a lot of improvement.
Would there be a way that we could? Would there be a way that we could, on some low water usage period, try to really get a more accurate, say, get water coming from all the other reservoirs and really try to do an assessment? Because if this one really is losing a significant amount, it might actuarially be smart for us to try to plan for some investments to really seal it up better. And it's just trying to be proactive about it, because why buy water and then flush it down the drain without being able to sell it?
I guess when you do have a tank that's as old as that one, it would not be realistic to expect it to have very, very little leakage. I mean, that's 100-year-old concrete. And I think what Eli's point is we have an annual operating practice of having divers come in. They can detect where the leaks are occurring, and then they seal them up. We'd have to think about if we could actually measure how much that is. The water is cycling through that tank so often that we'd have to give it up. I can get back to you on that, Paul.
Yeah. In the wintertime, we could run a period of time where we could test the leakage. Would have to be done in the winter when there's low demand period.
Okay.
The system here in Oregon City is relatively complex. That's because it's you've got a lot of hills, and we are limited in how much we can serve with any pressure zone in one area. And this is diagram. I'm not going to try to explain this, but just suffice to say, all those different colors on this chart here. This all represent different pressure zones, which are isolated from the other pressure zones, so that each of the customers in that pressure zone receives the appropriate level of pressure. You have, about 150 miles of distribution system pipelines, and this is a summary of the pipes that you have and the percentage of the overall system. So you have a lot of infrastructure underground in the Oregon, in the water distribution system. I'm going to talk a little bit about pipe replacement, and one of the reasons we brought you some examples today is to show you what happens to the pipe that's underground. We usually estimate that pipelines like this have a useful life of somewhere between 50 and 75 years. There's a lot of variables, but depending upon the soil conditions, some soils are more aggressive than others, depending upon the pipe materials, etc. 50 is sort of the bottom end. Some will go as high as 100 years, but probably a more realistic assessment would be that we can get 75 years of life out of one of these pieces of pipe. So you can do arithmetic. If you have 150 miles of pipeline and it lasts 75 years, to maintain or be on a sustainable basis with your distribution system, you should be replacing roughly about 2 miles of pipeline per year. So if you take the oldest condition pipe, the one that's in the worst condition, has the highest incidences of leaks, and replace that, you will maintain a system that will last forever because you're always on a sustainable level of replacement. Yes?
We got some old neighborhoods. We have some old neighborhoods, and I guess the question is, on the main pipelines, are there any more lead pipes left?
Yes.
Yes.
I also might add, though, that the 50 to 75 year lifespan is for ductile iron pipe, which is what our standard is today, and it has been probably since the mid-90s, early 90s. But we also have a lot of steel and cast iron pipe, steel pipe that doesn't last as long. So we've got a bunch of old pipe that probably will need to be replaced sooner than 50 years.
Especially small diameter steel pipe will go pretty fast. Yes.
Leaded joint is on 4th between the Bluff and Madison, or it goes down to the paper mill. And there's some AC up there at
Asbestos concrete.
between Holcomb and Rising, there's a couple of pipelines that go over.
Is there an effective way to measure water loss in pipes where you have a metered point and a metered point, where you could try to accurately identify loss where you have problematic piping?
We're undergoing right now a leak detection program. They just completed that, and we do 1/3 of the city. This time around, we did from Division.
Eli, could you hold it up a little closer?
From Division 7 north to the boundary. So they do 1/3 of the city as far as leak detections, and around that whole
A year?
area. Yes, every year.
If we were to replace 2 miles a year, you can see that we would have to spend roughly $2.3 million on replacement per year to maintain the useful life of your water distribution system. I'm not going to go into this one because that was for the Planning Commission. One of the things we did was to project what it takes for build-out of your system in terms of water demand, and you can see there's, on the average day, it's going to go from a little bit over 4 million gallons per day up to about 7 million gallons per day, and of course the other demands are simply a factor greater than that. So you can see, yes, sir.
How are you defining build-out?
Build-out is if you take the development within the urban growth boundary.
Including infill?
Including infill, yes. So any vacant area within that is currently in the city limits but not developed, that is included in there, yes. Here's a graph that shows what's some of the major pipelines and storage reservoirs that are going to be required. And you can see here there's a storage reservoir out here and a couple in closer, and some major pipelines. I'm not talking to the microphone. Pipelines that are going to be required to be able to serve out to the urban growth boundary. And again, we're only showing the large diameter stuff. The smaller stuff would be built by developers as they develop the developments. Yes?
Can you show me on this map where the build-out could occur?
It's the purple line.
Out to the purple line.
Yeah, and so we have that one reservoir shown outside the urban growth boundary, and that's simply to be able to get the elevation we need to be able to serve the outer end of the urban growth boundary.
So the three specific urban growth boundary expansion areas are the Beaver Creek Road, UGB expansion area. There's also the Park Place urban growth boundary expansion area, and both of those have had concept plans done for them. Then the third one is off of South End Road, expanding the city off of South End Road, and there has not been a concept plan completed for that area, but it is all within our urban growth boundary. And we didn't try to estimate how fast it's going to develop. This is basically, we're saying when it's all developed, that's the amount of water we need to plan for.
Now, to make some improvements, there are some deficiency within the existing system, primarily some improvements necessary to provide better pressures. And so these are the improvements that are necessary in your water distribution system to bring the existing system up to what we feel are the standards of pressure that you need to be able to provide. There are some areas where in a fire there simply isn't enough pressure, or the pressure drops and the systems are excessive. There are some renewal and replacement projects on the books. This is not a complete list. This is the ones that have been identified as the highest priority. And you can see that if you added this up, it's some right around $9 million. So there's an inventory here. Depending on how much money is raised, that's how fast you could make these improvements. But these are some of the areas that replacement and renewal is required. And for each of these projects, the master plan actually includes a map and shows some more detail. That's in the appendices of the master plan. So for if you needed more detail on a particular project, and as the project is actually budgeted in the future, it's in the master plan. I mean, it's a CIP, right? Oh, I'm sorry, capital improvement plan. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about money. This graph shows the revenue in blue for the last 5 years, including the current fiscal year, and it shows the operating expenses for the last 5 years. And the difference has been dedicated to capital expenditures. So over the last 5 years, quite a few projects have been completed, and those have been funded from rates. But this gives you sort of a base. You can see that the operating expenses are, have gone up from just under $4 million to almost, $4.5 million per year, and the revenues have been in excess of $5 million for that period of time. The projection is for the next 4 years. You can see revenue increasing at a rate we've assumed here. This is actually based upon action already taken by the Commission of 3% rate increases. We'll build the revenue up around to a little bit over, right at $6 million. And operating expenses we've assumed will increase based both upon inflation and a little bit higher rate of inflation for labor and those kind of things. So you can see there's an opportunity. Yes, sir.
Based on what you've shown us already, in just using 2014-15, there's less than $1 million left for capital. But
correct.
You showed us earlier that it takes $2.3 million a year in capital just to replace the worn-out pipes on a projected growth, not taking into account emergencies and all that. So none of those graphs show that we're replacing pipe at the rate we should be, so we're falling behind every year.
Correct. That is correct. At this rate, you are falling behind. And I'll be talking about that.
And actually, as is illustrated in the previous slide, the weather has a big impact on how much water we actually consume, and that affects how much revenue that's brought in. The wetter, colder summers, we've really used less water, which is good, but it also means our revenues are lower.
You can have
Which isn't good.
Yeah, you can have a 3% rate increase and have a very wet summer and have a 10% revenue reduction, simply because of the water use patterns. I added this chart just to show you where the costs go. That $4.5 million roughly. You can see a large piece of it goes to the South Fork Water Board. That's the cost that you pay for your share of the water that's produced at the water treatment plant. The next biggest chunk is both for salaries and fringe benefits, and then you have materials and services in the green. You have franchise fees, general fund administration, chemicals, pump station operation, and so forth. So this is just a quick breakdown in the percentages as to where the expenditures are for the system. Now, you are right now paying a bond which was passed in 1994 or sold in 1994, and that debt service will end in year 2014-15. And this is significant because the Oregon City Charter stipulates that when that happens, rates are going to roll back to pre-bond levels. So what that means is a little bit difficult to guess, but what your charter says that once the debt service is paid off, rates will decrease to pre-bond levels. Now, since 1994, there have been a series of rate increases, and so sort of for the, I don't know, I hate to call it the worst case scenario, but certainly a scenario that's certainly quite plausible, we've assumed that could mean that the rates are going to drop back to 1994 levels, but then you can increase them at the rates allowed for by the rate increases short of the big rate increase that was instituted back then. But how that's ultimately determined certainly isn't my call, but the Commission is going to have to wrestle with that. But I am going to show you what the impact of that is depending upon what scenario you might select. The first scenario that I'm going to show you is if the voters of Oregon City were to pass a charter amendment and not roll back rates, and you were to continue having a 3% rate increase every year, which is sort of the basis you've been on, except you've had, because that rollback specter has been out there. Oops. The second scenario we're going to look at is assuming a rate rollback in fiscal year 2015-2016, but the rate increase would be, or the rollback would be as if you went back to pre-1994 rates and had a 3% rate increase every year. The third one is similar, except you'd only have the increase when the Commission actually adopted a rate increase, because there were, I think, 6 or 7 years in that window where the Commission kept rates flat. So in this scenario, in those years where the Commission kept the rates flat, I kept it flat for this scenario. So that we would roll back and then increased it only in those years that the Commission increased rates. And then the last scenario is if Oregon City opted to go for a sustainable system where you would not roll back rates, actually increase rates to a level so that you could be on a sustainable basis and have enough capital to replace pipes as they break down.
So you explain that when you get to these individual ones?
Yes, I'm going to go through each one of these now. Here's scenario number 1. If you didn't have a rollback and you kept increasing rates about 3% per year, you can see there is some level of funding capacity in the system. And it goes from about $500,000 right now to approaching almost, it's about 900,000 or it's actually a little bit over $1 million in year 21-22. Now, it's not enough to be on a sustainable basis, but certainly enough to do some capital improvement of your system. In this scenario, you are losing about a mile a year. You're going to lose about a mile a year in terms of replacement that should be done if you want to be on a sustainable basis without ever having to go back for more funds in the future.
What is the cost of this mile a year? What is the cost of the mile per year?
Well, I calculate that. Let me give you I'll give it to you in this.
1.15 million.
2 miles a year was 2.3 million, so 1 mile would be what, 1.1 million. Okay?
Well, I'm just looking down at the money that's being transferred out of the water department in the proposed budgets of $850,000 a year to go into the Public Works Building Fund.
Well, as we have discussed before, that was a number I placed in there, and that is going to be a number that the commission ultimately decides, and we're going to show a lower number going in with that. It's going to be $500 a year, but whether or not that's done is a call of the commission, and so I can't respond to that.
It just appears as if that it would decrease our liquidity necessary to provide reasonable maintenance to the water system of having that type of outflow at that rate.
Correct. If anything that's spent decreases availability for other uses. The second scenario, you can see that in fiscal year 2015-16, the rollback in rates causes the revenue to drop, and the actual revenue is less than what you would be spending to maintain the system, and there's no money available at all for capital improvements under that scenario. Now, that's the scenario where I assume the 3% increase every year after the rollback. And if we go to the next scenario where we increase it only when the commissions acted to increase it, that would be this particular scenario. And you can see we have a 1.3 million deficit from day one when the rollback occurs. In other words,
Previous slide, I just want to compare it to.
We
Next.
actually only adopted 3% rate increases about half the years.
I think there's 6 or 7 years where early on where there was no rate increase, and it's compounding.
What I'm looking at is usage,
Oh,
or operating expenses. So, and then on the next one, see on this one, it looks like it's pretty much a straight line, but this one it's higher at the beginning, and then it starts increasing. Go back and look at the previous one. And the expenses that's almost a linear increase. But there's a jump at the beginning.
let's see. I got to figure out how to get back. Here we go. Okay, now you're looking at expenses.
Looking at operating expenses, it's pretty a linear increase there on those first two. When you get to 2B,
Okay, now which fiscal years are you talking about?
the first 4.
2011 through 2014?
Yeah, those.
The expenses. Look at the brown ones, not the blue
Okay, it
ones.
goes from about 4.7 to about 5.2.
Okay.
And starts at 5.
I just don't ever forget.
Can't answer. I'm going to have to check those numbers because I may have charted it wrong because they should be the same.
I would think.
Yeah.
What about 15, 16? Does that start? Because there is a drop. 16 is 5.2.
5.2 here.
It's consistent from 16 on.
16 on.
I made a mistake in those first 4 years, and I can't tell you what I did wrong, but I charted them wrong because they're the same. You're right. The expenses should be the same. But from 15, 16, they look like they're all the same.
My suspicion is that they wouldn't be exactly the same, because if it's deteriorating, I don't know that you could. Isn't it cumulative deterioration?
Well, I'm only plotting here operating expenses. There's no capital in these expenses.
And so, since it's not being repaired,
Theoretically, you get more money. You need more.
since you can't repair anything at all from here on out, I'm just saying, would it decrease at the same rate?
Well, what's going to happen, this is theoretical and this is operating expenses only, but what will happen if you operate where you're not on a sustainable basis, you can get by with it for a number of years, but then sooner or later it's going to catch up with you, and all of a sudden you're going to be spending most of the cruise time is going to be chasing emergencies.
I'm just thinking that
Yeah.
the repairs are going to be more expensive.
Oh, absolutely.
Future value is going to be more.
Absolutely. You're absolutely
Those
right.
are still mostly capital, except for the operating is like doing quick repairs, emergency repairs.
Emergency operating costs will start going up. That's been proven over and over again for utilities that don't keep up with their system. And then the third scenario, which is the scenario that would give you the capacity to be on a sustainable basis. Of course, you'd have to get rid of the rollback. You'd continue the 3% increase through 14-15, then you'd have a 10% increase, followed by 2 5% increases, and then back to the 3%. With that scenario, you can see you build a sizable capacity for capital improvements. Yes?
When you say that 3%, you're assuming the 3%. You say that 3%, you're talking about 3% from the
Correct.
planning to begin with, without the skipping of the years.
No, on this one, it's no rollback. No.
Well, I understand that,
Okay.
but without those years in which we didn't have the 3%.
But on this one, what I assumed is that for this coming fiscal year and 13-14 and 14-15, you'd have a 3% increase. And then in 15-16, after you
I
have a 2%.
understand what you're saying.
Yes.
But are you assuming that we've calculated a 3% since 1994 or whatever?
No, we're starting with the existing rates.
Oh, okay, thank
We're
you.
starting with the existing base rates. So you can see it's a 10% increase in 15-16, a 5% in both 17 and 18, and then back to the base of 3%. And that's the one that will create by the year 21, 22, you would have about $2 million. Pardon?
Do you want to go for 3?
Yeah, we're going backwards.
No, I'm going backwards. Sorry.
Here it goes.
Yeah, what to say?
Not exactly.
Not exactly. You're right. But you can see here that there's about a $2 million capacity to do capital funding, and that'll continue. And that as long as then the city is very, very careful in controlling its operational costs, then you have the capacity to fund capital improvements. But this will require a charter amendment by the voters of Oregon City. In fact, any alternative that does not have a rollback will require a vote of the people. Now, yes.
But your scenario 3 only gives us the 2.3 we need for pipeline replacement. It doesn't give us the $9 million we need for the pump stations, for the infrastructure replacement, like getting rid of the asbestos pipe on Holcomb and all that. So we would still at some point need to either bond out a capital thing to get $10 million if we're going to just leave this as sustainable, or agree to do a higher rate for a longer period of time in order to start getting caught up on some of these.
I think that if you went to that scenario, while there's some small pump station improvements, there would be enough revenue to be able to get on a sustainable basis. Now, yes.
Sorry, my phone.
Oh.
You got the speaker?
It doesn't.
Now you're off the speaker. In terms of things like new reservoirs and so forth, are they assumed to be built by SDCs or something of that nature?
Yes. The assumption is that those two reservoirs out there will have to be funded from SDCs because they're for growth.
And actually, the pipelines that would be going out.
And the pipes that go out there
Also funded with
will be
system
funded from
development
SDCs. Only the renewal and replacement and those few existing improvements I showed would be funded from these rates. The rest would have to be funded from SDCs.
Yeah, but that was still $9 million that you showed us.
Yeah. So that's 4 years worth or 5 years worth of this CIP.
That isn't pipes being replaced.
Much of that was pipe repairs.
Let me go back to that one.
There we go.
Most of this is pipeline work here. And as is most
that one.
as is most of this one, it's mostly pipeline. This is just the highest priority pipelines, but it's mostly pipeline work.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Back to your scenario 3. There we are. I'm looking at the rate increases from 3 to 10 to 5 to 3. And with that jumping around, I would think that you'd see some more significant changes in that revenue. But that revenue, once again, just looks like a linear increase. How do you do that?
I will go back. I just plugged in 10% increase in 15, 16, and then a 5 and a 5, and then it.
When you look at the ratio at the 3% increase from 14, 15, and then and then 15, 16 is 10%.
But let's look at the year 2019, 2020. We've got 8 million in revenue. Okay, roughly, slightly more. And if you took 3% of 8 million, you'd get what? It'd be about 0.4, and that's about the increase. But you remember, you're seeing an incremental increase, but you're taking 3% of a much bigger number now,
Compounded.
and it's compounded. We will certainly go back and double check these because you've already proven me wrong once. I'm not going to argue with you too hard.
I'm concerned about these the percentage increases coming up as projected here. That we finally get to a point where the costs of all utilities, when all added together, water, sewer, stormwater, and preventative maintenance road fees, will get to a point where the cost on the average homeowner or utility payer gets to be a significantly higher burden to a point where they can hardly afford to live. And when we have to be very cognizant that maybe market won't allow us to get the type of increase that you're projecting, and we come into a situation much like we did in 1994 where voters revolt and say that this is more than they can pay. Because we're seeing a lot of this accumulation going on right now. As an example, the new increases in the sewer rate, both storm and sanitary, scheduled to go in January, and then the road maintenance fees going up. And pretty soon, the straw could break the camel's back. And the voters out there, the people who are having trouble putting food into their mouth right now, can turn around and say, enough is enough. And this could be one of those areas where they turn around and put a gun against everyone's head and say, enough is enough. So it's getting to be very, very tenuous out there for a lot of people right now. And the feeling on the street is not good. There's everything on the news is talking about people, a great deal of unrest. So we should be very, very careful about that type of projection that overwhelms the constituencies out there that are needed to pass something.
Yeah, I do think one point of clarification I want to make is that in 1994, the city raised rates, I believe, by 60%, and that caused a revolt. And I do agree with you, it's important to very carefully consider how much people can afford and what's palatable politically. But I also think it's important to recognize how important your water distribution system is, and what if you keep it maintained, you'll have lower costs in the long run. So, but I understand what you're saying, and I agree that it has to be approached we have to make sure that people understand what the water distribution system does, that you can, that, and what requirements we have, EPA regulations on water quality. There's a lot of information I think is very important to share with the community.
I'd be curious in your analysis, how much comparison was done to comparable sized municipalities and what their rates are?
We really haven't.
And
I
not
mean, we
just the
can
size,
find
but to try
that.
to find
yeah.
a community
What we were
about
trying to
our
do,
size, and
Yeah.
I hate to say about as old as we have, but maybe we could find something in about the same, because we're the first city, yeah, but I mean, there must be some cities back east someplace, or maybe even Midwest, that are about the same age as we are, and I wonder how they manage their infrastructure and what their rates are.
Yeah, and
I just think it'd be
we
a good
usually
study.
do that when we do the final rate study and we present it for more study by the city commission. At this point, we're looking at what are what is the city's needs, and we're trying to compare, trying to give the planning commission and the city commission and everyone here an idea of, what are the bookends on what we're going to be facing, and this is what we need for our water master plan. And then as we go forward with actually the city commission actually selecting a funding strategy for the city water system, then we look at what are other people paying and that kind of thing. And I think that is a good idea to do.
Maybe when you're looking at that, you can also you can also look at what the people that work for them receive in benefits and wages. And
I do know
compare.
that our we do class comp studies periodically in our human resources department, and that's how we set salaries. And as far as I know, we're very comparable with other Portland region cities of particular of our size, like Milwaukee, Westland. Those are the kinds of cities we look at.
Points you make are excellent because, as a practical matter, the rollback is in the charter. And so whatever the commission ultimately decides to do, the people of Oregon City will have to vote on it. So I think at this stage, as Nancy said, all we can do is frame the issues and sort of what the range of options that the city has. There is some good news here, and that is in 4 years you're out of debt. The Oregon City water utility will have no more debt. That's good news. Number two, you have some of the best water in the world, safe water. So there's good news, and you have a system that works. I mean, you turn the faucets on, it works. You got pressure. If the fire department goes out and fights fires, they can fight fires. So, there is some good news there, but at the same time, we have some challenges that we have to face, and the purpose of this master plan is really to frame those challenges, and then then the commission can go ahead.
What you're talking about in terms of the infrastructure and everything else are the city lines and so forth. Are we taking account anything in terms of the master plan development of South Fork? And, it's a different entity, and although the city commission's on it, the bills are carried through on all water rates, and so is that built into this development at all?
It shows up in the revenue I showed you. In fact, I'm going to go back to that chart because it's, whoops. It is a factor because right now it's hidden in your rates. You can see here the purple. That's the pass-through. Your citizens receive a bill, and they don't see that.
Yeah.
And when the South Fork Water Board votes to increase rates, it's not a commission vote. It simply reduces the revenue you have for the rest of your system. So you will see one of the recommendations I'm making is that needs to be segregated in the bill, so that when the South Fork Water Board votes a rate increase, the citizens understand it's a South Fork water rate increase. Yes, sir.
If you go to, I think your 2B slide, you have that blue bar.
Yes,
That's South Fork.
that's South Fork, which shows you that it takes a pretty significant bite out of your revenue.
Because you're not projecting increases on that.
And I drew a straight line. But yeah, it's going to go up.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the South Fork now, and if you could pretty much trend it the same angle as the others. Yes, sir.
Okay, the commissioner maybe brought up about bonding, and with the cost of construction right now being very low, if we were to bond out potential critical maintenance items that could hit the ground early and get a lower cost of getting them done, and then doing them as they're needed, you might say, or as they erupt. Could we maybe, by using bonding, create a scenario that could, in effect, dampen our costs of maintenance overall by getting ahead of it?
The percentage of your maintenance budget right now that goes into replacement is relatively small. And so if you were to issue bonds, you could take advantage of today's market in terms of costs of doing improvements, but then you'd also be paying interest on the bonds. And so
In roads, it costs less. We could bond roads and get savings.
Wasn't it the thing that increased our rates dramatically? Wasn't that bonds? I think it had the same revolt.
The money's cheaper now.
But I understand it's cheaper now, but if you bonded, you still bring the rates up, and I think
Well,
you still have the same issues.
I think that we could look at something like that and try to estimate an interest rate and estimate how long you'd hold the bonds for, and to see how much the cost of the bonds would be relative to how much you might save at today's construction dollar rates. But I might add that we wouldn't be able to sell any bonds until we have a stable water rate, which we don't until we until we determine how the city wants to handle the existing charter requirement.
You could not sell bonds under the current charter. Anyway, so my recommendations. Number one is begin that dialogue. It's not too early. I think it's important that the citizens of Oregon City understand the issues, and ultimately they will vote. And the more we can get the word out, the more informed they will be when they vote. And they will ultimately make the call as to what they like or don't like about the system and how they choose to vote. So that's the good news, is the fact that the citizens, it's the citizens' call.
What happened? Was it 94?
Yes.
What happened then is, I don't think there was that much dialogue. I mean, there was understanding the bonding was going to occur, but I don't think people were aware of it. Second thing that happened, I think it was an attempt on the part of the city at that time, since there's almost nobody on staff that was involved in that. They went from a 2-month, every 2 months water rate, and all of a sudden went to a 1-month water rate. And I think that made the public very, very angry.
I'm recommending that you adopt a sustainable basis for your funding. I know from having done a lot of rates over my career that those communities that use pay-as-you-go financing on the long term have the lowest rates. Simple as that. I've even known communities have foregone grants because they felt like they didn't want to borrow money, and in the end they tend to have the lower rates because they're not paying interest. And also on scenario 3, if you defer that maintenance, you can get away with it 15, 20 years, but then the piper will come home. And so that's also been proven. And then finally, I'm recommending that you set up the system so that when you bill your customers, so that they can see how much is for your water distribution system and the city cost that the city controls versus how much is under the control of the South Fork Water Board, so that they understand the differential. And with that, I'll answer questions, or try to answer questions.
First of all, I think we need to do the same thing with our sewer system. We've got to separate the Tri-City bill from the other, because that's one thing we have no control of. At least the Tri-City commissions that own South Fork, they do have some control there. We don't have any control over the county, so that separation is a great idea. The thing I'm a bit concerned about is that although Oregon City is probably in good shape, the water rights in the Clackamas are going to become very, very problematic as North Clackamas develops, and there's not going to be enough water for them. And the thing is, nothing in here talks about conservation. In fact, if you talk about conservation, you're going to develop a mechanism where the revenues are going to go down if we're being responsible and from that point. And maybe in this process here, maybe we're not at the point we need to discuss that, but I think we do need to discuss conservation.
As part of the master plan for the South Fork Water Board, they have prepared a water management and conservation plan that is being implemented through the board, not by the individual cities. So there is some level of discussion on the water conservation.
The same thing applies, though.
Oh, yeah.
That's our reference.
So
Well,
we should probably make folks aware of what that says in in the South Fork Conservation Plan.
Right. And that's an issue faced by all water districts. Is on the one hand you'd like to conserve water, and on the other hand you immediately bite yourself in the foot when you do it. Yes, sir.
Along those same lines, a grenade I threw in the Planning Commission is we should probably look at getting aquifer water rights and the land water rights, because they're not regulated the way the in-stream rights are. And, you know, I think we should be looking at, when we annex land, that we also gain control of their water rights so that we can control what's going into and coming out of the various aquifers, particularly up on the bluff. Then we can recharge them in the winter and, you know, extract during the summer when we need it. So I have the attorney looking at that, and he's not all that joyous about it. But still, I think it's just prudent to have that fight now before we're building dams and shooting people and opening pipes and stuff like in the Klamath.
Well, you know, you are lying above the Troutdale aquifer, and Milwaukee's supply is 100% from that aquifer, and it's an excellent supply. So if you could get a well or two approved in that aquifer, it would be certainly excellent backup supply in case something happened to the Clackamas River. So that might be
Although Clackamas River water has an aquifer in the ground in Oregon City, and they've been having some water quality problems with it. So it's difficult.
Yeah, it depends where you're getting
Where
it.
you
Yeah.
get it, right.
And as you know, well, Milwaukee years ago had some problems with theirs too, but that was primarily a pollution issue that's been resolved.
Right.
Well, they resolved it. They now treat their water and have resolved it. Yes, sir.
Lake Oswego, is it Tiger,
Tiger.
that are combining together to drink our water?
They're drinking out of our water.
No, but they got their own. But they're going to be taking a lot of water out of the Clackamas River with this new expansion, and I think it comes back to what the mayor was talking about. We're going to be fighting over water rights soon when they start taking a lot of water out. So it's the day is coming, and not too far away.
Are there any other questions? John wants to make a comment.
Well,
Clackamas River water wields through our system to serve the south end and Henry out further out that way. Do the capital improvements in the city include their growth needs or the needs for are we also looking at what they're projecting for need?
Yeah, when we did the analysis, we looked at the base flows, and we included in the analysis the amount of water we're wielding to Clackamas River water, and then we talked to them about what they expected that growth to be, and increased it a bit to recognize that growth. So yes, it's included in the analysis.
Okay. And then the other thing was just a point. We've I don't have as much history as some in the room have, but I've always heard the argument about certain people not being able to pay because of their income. They're on fixed incomes, and just not wanting to pay for the value of that water. And that was even through when economic times were booming. Even at those times, in particular in Oregon City, we were holding those rates as tight as we could. That's always been the standard. And it seems like the value of water or sewer or public infrastructure at all is just not well respected in any communities, let alone Oregon City. And I don't know if you have any recommendations as to how we take that conversation or have that conversation with people that, we need more people to listen, because I think the people in this room understand the value of that water. But do you see any success stories with agencies that have been able to have that conversation in a convincing way that's been good for their community and good for that public infrastructure? That many agencies have facilities. Maybe there was some federal dollars involved in building those, way back when. I don't know the history of all that, but it sure seems like we need to figure out how to bring the community in and sell them on the fact that infrastructure is pretty important, and they really probably haven't paid, an appropriate rate to get it even to where it is today.
Well, you've got when a utility does a very good job and remains quiet, then people have the ability to forget about that utility and take it for granted. But I have seen examples where communities have gone out for, let's say, a large bond issue, where when the public understood what was at stake, why they were doing it, and what it would cost, that they have overwhelmingly supported those bond issues, whether it be sewer or water. So I think that that the general public, when given the opportunity to understand what's going on, will be supportive. And the one, I call it a luxury that we have here, is we have a 3-year window to find a way to get the message out, so that when ultimately we do have to go to the people for a vote, we will have had a chance to do a fairly decent job of providing the information so that they fully understand what's at stake. And when the public understands what's at stake, generally they can be very, very supportive. But they have to have confidence that they're being, given the real story, and that's the key.
The example of that is the Oak Grove Sanitary Sewer District that went out, and rather than issue or go for geo bonds, they did a whole bond study, got it out, presented it to the public as the lowest possible cost mechanism that they could put together, and the public overwhelmingly approved the whole bonding package by, I think, 70% in a vote. And that was recent times, and it was just amazing because people didn't think that they could do that, but they built their case. They showed that they were fiscally responsible. County Commissioner Paul Savas was the head of the sanitary district at the time, and helped orchestrate that with Thelma Hegenmeyer, and they won it in an amazing manner. But a lot of great PR was done.
Paul, were they in crisis mode?
No.
No. Okay.
No, but it was how they went out and educated, and that was here in Clackamas County, not too far from us, and people, and they beat everything that was being done by Clackamas County with CCSD or WES in their approach. So it can be done.
Any other questions? Or concerns?
Well, I do have one more. Excuse me.
Of course.
I look at the plan here of all of the pipes that are going in the proposed water recommendations, and of those pipes, how much of those pipes that are in the red in the map are those pipes that are going to be funded by maintenance, and how much of those are going to be funded by SDCs? What is the kind of the mix of that? Because there's a lot of this piping is proposed, like going into Kenema, as I've mentioned previously, that is really not needed, because those pipes go into Metro Park area. And even though it's in the city limits, we have a lot of piping here that is being projected to be needed. Even pipe going all the way down south of Kenema Bluff into the unincorporated area within the UGB, like we've talked about, for a possible jobs area. But is that that could be annexed? But no one has ever talked about annexing that area, and we're showing a 12-inch a new 12-inch water pipe coming through Kenema and pumping all the way out to there. So a lot of the piping that's shown on this map, I think, really needs substantial review to make sure that that all of it as is projected. I know at least the Kenema stuff is not required.
That's a good question, and what I would say is that what the pipeline extensions and new pipes would be paid for either by development or system development charges. We do not use rates to extend the water system for growth. And the map that you see with those future pipelines on it is what we need if there was, say, to be a restroom in the Kenema area, in the parks. If you wanted to, if you want to have water service there, that's what you need. It doesn't mean you have to build it.
We already have that
So.
in the plan right now.
But if there was another one, and then also as a South End concept plan area develops, looping some of those areas back there is a good idea. And Walt, do you have anything to add about that? Does that make sense to you? That those pipes will go in if development occurs. If it does not occur, they don't go in. Or if you wanted to have firefighting capacity in the parks, that's something that is not going to be my decision.
She's exactly right. None of these extensions are going to happen unless there's demand for the extension, and it'll be paid for from SDCs or development costs, not from rates.
Okay.
One thing, though, that you might enjoy doing before you leave is Eli, our water supervisor, brought in, and Jake, our utility maintenance specialist, brought in some examples of old pipe that they've taken out of the ground. And something that people may not be aware of is that the water reacts with the pipe material and actually causes all kinds of growth on the inside of a pipe. And that affects the capacity of the pipe because it causes more friction, and it also just takes up space. The other one, there's a skinny pipe that's on the counter over there that they just have taken out of the ground. We're doing some water line replacement on Ogden Drive, and there's an old water meter you might want to look at, and then there's also a piece of nice new ductile iron pipe that we're replacing the old pipes with. But it's really quite interesting to see the kind of things that happen in a water pipe. That's amazing to me.
Thank you all.